Hello, party people, and welcome to another edition of Office Hours, where you can ask me anything about the Microsoft Data Platform, SQL Server, Azure SQL DB, and you can post your questions up there at that link up at the top, polgab.com/room/Brento. Andy Leonard's in the house. Good to see you, Andy. One of you, let's see who it was. It was SQL Pilot says, I flew over Iceland yesterday, LAX to Copenhagen. It was still eerily empty at the international terminal at LAX still. That's totally been my experience with the few flights that I've done. I cannot believe how empty international airport terminals are. I mean, I can believe it, of course. It just kind of makes sense. Yes, I'm actually streaming during your workday, right? Can you believe it? And the reason why I'm streaming today is I have a class in United States friendly time, or like I'm trying to think of it as America's friendly time, North and South America friendly time. I have a class Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in America's friendly time, which will start right now. I'm doing my mastering query tuning class. And so I'm trying to just make sure that my equipment's okay, that the students will have a good time, and that my body clock is on the right clock, which always makes things just a little bit tricky. Oh, Spitfire's here as well. So the way that I do this, of course, with Office Hours is I take your most highly voted questions. I just go in through PollGab and I start showing whatever's highly voted. And the number one was, what's everyone feeling about a lot of database administrators transitioning to data engineers roles? Well, the first thing inside that question is, you got to understand that in database administration, you kind of have a limited career runway. If you love database administration, and really this is the same thing true as for systems administration, security administration, SSIS, ETL work, data warehousing, whatever. If you find an in-depth technical niche that you just love, you have a limited amount of things that you can do with that. You can only become so senior. So when you want to grow beyond that, either you're going to look at transitioning into management, which is really effectively an entirely different skill set. I know people who get to the end of their technical runway and they think, well, now it's time for me to take off and become a manager, and they're just shocked at how different those skills are. I was in that bucket. Like I thought, okay, I'll try and see managing people and see how that is. I had a terrible time with it. It's so awful, and at some point I should probably have I think like 2 presentations full of stuff on what I've learned from management through the years, and it's not a whole lot. So some people will try to transition into the management role. Other people will transition into the consulting or contracting role. Other people will decide to stay in that role. Like if you want to be a database administrator the rest of your life, you totally can do that, and you can make a really good living. There's still tons of open DBA job positions. Or if people are in one job or one role for a really long time, sometimes they get the siren song to move somewhere else, like the grass is greener on the other side. I think right now data science is so on fire and data engineering is so on fire that it's exactly what development was in the year 1999 and 2000. If you could spell C#, you could get a job doing C# in 99 and 2000. That's not entirely true. That skill set didn't really come hot for another 3 or 4 years after that. But C++, HTML, if you could spell PHP, you could do extremely lucky. That's that same way right now in data science and data engineering. If you have any kind of experience or training in data science and data engineering, you stand a pretty good likelihood of getting jobs in that realm. And temporarily, the money is really good in those jobs. I don't think it's going to be really good for forever. So I have seen people in database administrator roles transitioning over to data science, data engineering, because they're tired of database administration. I don't blame them. It's not for everybody. Or because they decide that they don't want to be on call anymore. Often those jobs aren't on call. The second part of your, I still can't spell HTML. The second part of your question is, I've met people with 25 years of, or 35 years of database administration who transitioned because of the lack of clients. What are your feelings about this? I am turning away work. Like I've gone and subcontracted work out to other people. When new clients come in, very often I refer them to other companies who are consulting companies who are a better fit. And if you look at some of the consulting companies in my space, not my space, but in the database administration space, they're on fire. What I would humbly suggest is that if you've been doing this for 25 to 35 years, the way that you get clients has changed completely, and not everyone was able to handle that radical shift. The old way of getting clients is you would call someone you know. You'd be like, well, I know Phyllis. She's been working with databases for 30 years. I'm going to go call her. The new way is, this is going to sound incredible, Google. Right? Like when you need something these days, you just go Google for it. And if you can master search engine optimization and get your site high enough in the search results, you can harvest clients from all over the world, regardless of what your office size is. You know, in the old days, consulting companies had to have a big, expensive local office in every city, and that would impress clients enough to get them to spend money. These days, you just really need a good online storefront. So what I would say is you just want to be careful as to why people, I know, right? It's a secret to high revenue. Be very careful about why you're not getting clients, and be willing to work for someone who did make that transition, just in case you're not willing to. Next up, next highest voted question is from CKI. CKI says users are complaining about slowness in one part of the PHP application. We're using Amazon Web Services SQL Server Web Edition. I don't have access to the application or application logs. I used Profiler to find out that the queries are very fast. What do I do in this situation? So, how can I rephrase this? People are complaining about slowness in PHP. What you're really asking is, how can I tell if it's a database problem or not? Profiler is an interesting approach in that I'm gonna say something that might kind of piss you off. I haven't used Profiler for 10 years at least. Maybe, probably only about 10 years. Profiler is a pretty dated way to do that, and there are better ways to do it these days, like the plan cache, like extended events. I think you're still on the right track, though. If you profiled queries and you didn't see any problems, what I would say is sit with the developers and say, show me what's slow. You know, show me as you're executing things, show me what's slow, and run the Profiler trace next to them. And I'm only saying that because you use Profiler. If you use Profiler and you're comfortable with it, I want you to get across the finish line as quickly as possible. I don't want to waste your time in terms of troubleshooting. If you're going to spend the rest of your life doing database administration, I'd be like, hey, how about we wean you off Profiler and go get you on another tool instead. But because you're already familiar with Profiler and because you're very vaguely confident that it's not a database problem, I would sit next to the developers and say, go click through the parts of the application that are slow and let's see what happens. And then you're showing them Profiler at the same time. And then say, okay, now can you open up the part of the PHP code that's running while this part is processing? And then you can start just talking through together to see what's going on in that code. There's a technology or a tactic in troubleshooting called the rubber duck tactic. I first heard about it from Jeff Atwood's blog, where when you wanted to troubleshoot something, you would go tell a rubber duck what was going on. You would like ask the question of the rubber duck. And by talking through that question out loud, it would force you to realize what's really happening. Well, in this situation, you are effectively the rubber duck. What you're doing there is you're being the rubber duck for the developers as they step through the code and they're like, oh, thank you. I never thought that reading from a file system in another country might cause a slowdown. But it's really just about being a sounding board for them so that they can walk through the code and tell you what's going on. Next up, Disturb Chucky. No, that is not Disturb Chucky says, is that where the idea of rubber ducks came from? I have no idea where the idea of rubber ducks came from. And I could never figure out what the tie-in was with that, like why Idera used rubber ducks. It didn't seem to make a whole lot. But at the same time, everybody likes rubber ducks. Like, who doesn't like to go up and squeeze a rubber duck? So that was kind of cool. Wind Raven says, I use Angry Bird debugging because my daughter bought me a stuffed Angry Bird when the movie came out. That's kind of cool. That's not so bad. Yeah, I like that. That's not so bad. All right, Rubber Ducky, you're the one. Next up, Sal asks. Sal says, I'm a back-end, front-end mobile developer, and I feel like I'm doing too much, and I'm not proficient at any, but I have to because I build apps for clients or for myself. What are your thoughts on that? I'm going to talk philosophically for a second. What do you work for? If you're like me, you work to retire. I'm not working because I love this stuff. I do love this stuff. But when I'm given the chance between working and not working, or given the choice between working and not working, I don't work. I like not working. Not working's pretty cool. If your objective is to get across the finish line towards retirement as quickly as possible, then you want to maximize the dollars you receive for every hour that you work. If your skills are very wide, but not very deep, like you know a whole bunch of things, kinda, sorta, you can make great money building apps or building sites, whatever, as long as you're either charging someone else enough for it, or if you're getting equity in the things that you build. For example, if you're building side projects that gradually pay you more and more on the side while you can go on and do other stuff, then it can make sense. But if you find yourself being a jack of all trades and you're only making like $20, $30, $40 an hour, then it's time to either specialize or start building things that pay you side income. All right, next up, let's see here. We have G Surgeon says, from Amsterdam, from Netherlands. G Surgeon says, we have inside the database users with English and users with Dutch. Different user language will result in more plans in the plan cache, but that's just not a problem according to a friend. Are there any drawbacks of having multiple user languages in use? Let me remix that and say, do you have to have it? Anything you don't have to have, you probably shouldn't have. But if you do have to have it, you really don't have much of a choice. It's not like we can change SQL Server to give you more plans in the cache. What that friend is getting at is, if you have different session level options like Arithboard or ANSI nulls on or off, if I remember right, you're effectively cutting the number of plans that you can have in the cache in half. If your server isn't under plan cache pressure, that's not that big of a deal. If your server is under plan cache pressure, like if you've got a whole bunch of unparameterized queries that are flooding the plan cache and every new query that comes in needs to be compiled, you're not going to fix that by taking away user languages. You're going to fix that by fixing all the unparameterized queries that are rolling through the plan cache. So I've never had a situation where I've been able to tell a client, hey, I need you to use standardized connection options across the board, because just either they need different ones or they don't. But there's a good question at the heart of that. It's just that the fix isn't that. The fix is to go chase down which queries are coming through that are unparameterized. And we talk about that in the Mastering Query Tuning class this week, funnily enough. Next up we have Marcio asks, I have two tables that join via hash match in batch mode, and I'm getting a concatenation error. When I'm processing in row mode with the same operators, I don't get an error. Why? Open a support case with Microsoft. Anytime that you have a query processing error come out that happens in one mode but not another, just go call Microsoft. It's $500 to open a case with Microsoft. They're the only ones who can fix it. It's a bug in the engine, and they'll refund you the $500 when they find out that it's a real actual bug. And I'm assuming in your case that it is a bug. They'll refund the $500 for you. Maybe they'll fix it, maybe they won't. They may just tell you, well, for this one you have to use a query hint that avoids batch mode. So, but there you go. Oh, next up, I'm a null set asks, what is the oldest bug in Management Studio that causes you the most frustration when it crops up? Live query plans are a giant thorn in my side. Those things are ridiculous. Live query plans work just enough, or live query statistics work just enough in order to tempt me, but not well enough to actually rely on for day-to-day use, which is just infuriating. It's one of those features that clearly nobody ever uses at Microsoft on a daily basis, because they would fix these bugs immediately, because the feature is just such a hot, steaming pile of dog poop. It is that bad. But it's one of those that they trot out for demos every now and then. They're like, look how amazing this is. Just don't use it in real life. Drop Table Employee says no dark mode. I must be like totally old person, because I don't really care about dark mode in Management Studio, but there are so many people who do, and I run dark mode on my computer. I mean, you can't tell it from that thing there is rendered in white. I run dark mode on my computer. I'm a fan of dark mode, but I'm just like, for Management Studio, they only have so many hours in the day. I can understand why they don't fix it. Let's see here. Oh, wow. Oleg asks a really great opinion question. When would you recommend not to use SQL Server? Whenever you don't need joins between tables. If you don't need a join, go put it in a key value store, a document database, a file system. If you're not doing joins, get it the hell out of a relational database. I'm not saying that everything with a join needs to be in a relational database either, but that's the big black and white line for me. If you're not doing joins, get it the hell out of a database server. Then the other pieces of it, Casey says not to see the floaters in my eyes. I have that too as well. I have that exact same problem as well. And I agree that there's a kind of sort of dark mode that kind of hacks through, but it's not very good. Oleg continues with, is there a specific number of transactions per second that are too low or too high and SQL Server can't handle, or database size may not be supported by SQL Server, perhaps some other reason or consideration? I wouldn't go that way, because if you want to do, say, 100,000 queries per second, typically the bigger problem is caching, that somebody's asking for the same 50,000 or 100,000 result sets per second, and they need to implement caching. And then as soon as you implement client-side caching, then that just makes that problem go away. I'm not talking about browser caching. I'm talking about in your application tier, having a pool of memory-only servers like Redis, Memcache, whatever, that will hold result sets temporarily for you, so that if the next time you need them, you don't need to go back to the database. Over and over again, I see people doing things like shopping websites where they go and pull the products every time from the database server. You don't need to do that. Go store them in cache. Your products don't change that often. If somebody sees invalid products for 30 seconds, it's not going to kill you. But it'll make it an unbelievable life-changing difference, just implementing caching. But for me, the big one is joins. Oh, the next highly voted question comes from Graham. Graham says, this is a totally frivolous location question. You've been in Iceland now for a quantity of time. What has been the highlight of your time there and your one must-do thing while visiting? So we went to Iceland the first time in 2019, and we were here for like 10 days. We came back in 2020. We stayed for like a month. But each time that we came, we wanted to come for longer and longer periods of time. This time we're here for 9 months. We would love to have a house here. We would love to build a house here and stay here like half of the year. So I think that there's so many things we were really lucky to see during the pandemic, because there weren't any tourists here. Often you see that behind the Instagram stuff, where you'll see somebody's picture on Instagram and a place looks idyllic, but as soon as you see behind the Instagram, like you turn the camera the other way, it's just hordes of tourists. Well, we didn't have that in Iceland during the time that we were here, because people for the most part weren't allowed to travel into Iceland. So my favorite thing from Iceland so far has been some of the tourist-heavy sites that we got to see with no one else around. Like if you've seen the Netflix series Katla, which is awesome. Can't recommend it good enough. It's fantastic. Katla, there are several things inside there on the south coast of Iceland that we were able to see firsthand with no tourists around, like the plane wreck. So that would be my big thing, was just seeing things without any tourists. My one must-do thing while visiting, I think, and this is a little expensive, you're talking like probably $4,000 to $5,000 US, but take a helicopter tour. There is so much of Iceland that isn't really appreciable from the ground, and it makes an amazing difference seeing it from the air. So that would be my one must-do thing. I think it's just absolutely incredible, because in 4 or 5 hours, 3 to 5 hours really, you can get pretty short, like 3-hour helicopter tour. You can see just jaw-dropping stuff, and really give you a feel for the incredible grand scope of Iceland, especially with a volcano happening right now. The live volcano eruption, just amazing to see from a helicopter. Next up, Riff asks, he says, so the 5,000 row rule for lock escalation, technically that's not exactly what it is. In a quick Q&A session, I don't have enough time to clarify. Oh, John, that's great to hear. You're going to really enjoy it. Although it's December, it's a very different place. A lot of it is closed up, and it's very dark too. But you do get to see the northern lights, most likely, so that's cool. Is the 5,000 row rule for lock escalation, which isn't that's not exactly how it works, but I appreciate that you didn't have much space either to clarify that. Is that the same in Azure SQL? Azure SQL DB, yes. Azure SQL DB managed instances, yes. Azure SQL DB hyperscale, yes. There are other flavors of Azure that I just want to be really careful that everybody understands, like MySQL and Postgres and Cosmos DB. Those are totally different. But as long as you're talking about the ones that are driven by SQL Server, that's fantastic. I wouldn't, I'll elaborate on that in a second. What do you think of automatic plan correction features in Query Plan Engine on Azure SQL? That's actually available in SQL Server 2019 as well. Both SQL Server 2019 and Azure SQL DB offer automatic plan correction. I think it's hot garbage, and I talk about why that is in my mastering parameter sniffing class. There's a huge long laundry list of reasons, but I think really that's one of the reasons why I can't do justice to a question like that. That's why I run my training classes, which is a good thing to talk about. This week's sponsor, I guess it's over there. This week's sponsor is a brand new free set of webcasts that I'm doing over at... That's not this week's sponsor. That's actually next week's sponsor. This week's sponsor is the Live Class Season Pass. Live Class Season Pass, if you go to training.brennozer.com, for one price, you can attend all of my live training classes for an entire year straight. Mastering index tuning, mastering query tuning, mastering parameter sniffing, mastering server tuning, all of that jazz. So that's really where I get the chance to go into way more details and show all kinds of demos. So if you want to learn more, literally, go over to training.brennozer.com and check out the Live Class Season Pass. Now back over to the question, in terms of what do I think of it? I think it's hot garbage, and I explain why in mastering server or mastering parameter sniffing. Next up, let's see. Oh, and so SQL Pilot had asked, so the helicopter tour and the wrecked plane, well, it was just one thing, so I would say the helicopter tour. The wrecked plane was something that I got to do when no tourists were around. I don't think that that's the thing to go see if you're only going to see one thing about Iceland, though. The one thing would be the helicopter tour. From the future. Next up, we have Kumaran, who asks, we have a view that executes without a parallel plan. Could this be because the serial plan was better than the parallel, or SQL Server was only able to generate a good enough plan, or could there be any other reason? So there are lots of reasons why SQL Server may not generate a parallel plan. The thing that I would start by asking is, does that view have any scalar functions in it? Does it call any scalar functions? if it's calls scalar functions and you're not on SQL Server 2019 with 2019 compat level, I start to get worried because the presence of any scalar function anywhere in the query causes the whole calling query to go single threaded. The number one reason that I see situations like this is that someone used a scalar UDF in the view, and then all queries that call that view go single threaded, which is totally a sad trombone moment. The other part of your question was, how can I tell why? So let's go do a quick demo over in Management Studio. So let's switch over here. Oh, let's see here and go over here. Not the DBA you're looking for. I appreciate where you're coming from, but unfortunately you're wrong. Oh, I know, right? You're wrong because he said that he was able to get it when he typed a query in directly, if I remember right. He says the view that executes it. Well, no, he didn't say that. He didn't make that really clear there. It could be that. So when you go to run a query, if I say, let's say, for example, whoopsie, come back over here, select star from sys databases, and I look at the execution plan, if I right-click on the select and I go into properties, so you right-click on whatever the root node is, and then you go over there into properties. Over in the properties, there's going to be a assuming that it didn't go parallel for a reason, there'll be a non-parallel plan reason. And then in here, the drawback is that it doesn't give you a whole lot of specifics. There are a lot of times when there's one reason in here and it's just kind of broad, like I couldn't generate a valid parallel plan. But that is going to be your starting point as to how you troubleshoot where that comes from. All right, next up, let's see here. Next up, we have Jana says, a friend of mine is really curious whether or not index fragmentation has any impact on performance when data files are stored on solid state. So if you search on YouTube for Brent Ozar fragmentation, I have a whole entire video, it's about an hour long, called Why Defragmenting Your Indexes Isn't Helping. So go search for that. Brent Ozar fragmentation, Why Rebuilding Your Indexes Isn't Helping. And I spend about an hour digging into the details on that. I've been thinking about doing a whole week on just fragmentation blog posts, because I'm stunned at how often it comes up. It comes up all the time in office hours. People are like, fragmentation, fragmentation, fragmentation. What should my clustered index be? How does foreign keys come into play? People get really obsessed over page splits and fragmentation and fill factor. And at the same time, it's something that doesn't really matter that much in terms of performance, but people are obsessed by it. So I feel like I'm going to do a whole week's or maybe even 2 weeks blog post series digging into details on it. Not because it's going to help, but just to give me something that I can point y'all to when you ask these questions. Because I get the sinking feeling that I'm pointing people towards this YouTube video and people aren't actually watching it, because some people prefer to read. Some people don't prefer to do any work whatsoever. Next up, Radu asks, why do you think a database stuck in a restoring state while trying to do a restore? Here's a quick reminder, you've been there before. DBA Stack Exchange. DBA Stack Exchange. All right, let's copy that out and let's go take a look and see what's going on with this. Let's switch over here. So here's that link that they pointed us to. Identify root cause for why the database is stuck in a restoring state. If I scroll down here, you have an answer. You have an answer, and I wrote it. Is this thing on? Is anybody listening inside there? Maybe it's my microphone. Maybe the microphone isn't on? Let's stop for a second and let's just digress and have a little discussion here about what it's like to answer questions on the internet. It is terrible to answer questions on the internet. People don't read. People don't take your advice. People don't listen to you. I gave this person an answer and they won't even bother reading it. You people who do that kind of thing are lucky that I can't reach through this camera and poke my finger in your eye. The hell is wrong with you? Read the answer. Quit asking the damn question again. God bless. Unbelievable what people are like. Lo and behold, you're welcome. Glad you liked it there. So next up we have Future DBA asks. Future DBA says, I've been working as a SQL person for 4 years. I'm trying to grow and learn more. Are there any recommendation certification courses I could use to grow my career? Oh, that's an interesting question. So certification programs are built in order to make money. Oh, not to make you money. They're built to make money for whoever does the certification. Think about that one for a second. When people want to sell you a certification, they are literally selling you something. So is there a certification that will help you to grow your career? It helps. Oh, Surly Dev. Hey, good to see you. Good to see Surly Dev. So when people are selling you a certification, you just got to be really mindful that they're trying to take money from you. I am not a big fan of certifications because for the most part, certifications are used to help you part with your money. But when you're in a stack of resumes and you're competing with everybody else who's a stranger, the certification doesn't help you stand out. It only helps you fit in with everybody else. The way that you truly stand out is to know people on the other side of the screen. Find out who works at the company, go to their user group meetings, go to SQL Saturdays, meet them, speak in front of user group events, speak for vendors, etc. But the resumes, or if you're just in a stack of resumes with everybody else, the certification isn't going to help you get the job. Now, having said that, I really hate the hell out of most vendor certifications. Having said that, some people use a certification in order to gauge that they've checked a bunch of boxes. They're like, well, I want to learn a whole bunch about data science, so I'm going to go get a data science certification. And in order to do that, what the certification measures helps me make a list of all the things that I need to go study. And then when they pass the certification, they feel like their studying job is done. You can use certifications to motivate yourself like that. I know the last time I talked about certifications publicly, I got my butt reamed out by somebody who was like, I've used certifications to get over 40 certifications and learn all kinds of things. I'm very proud of it, and I can't believe that you would say certifications suck. Well, okay, first off, if you have over 40 certifications, that's kind of proof that your knowledge doesn't really stretch that far. These things are just getting you to study a list of stuff, and they're taking money from you. They will gladly print you the certification in exchange for your check, and they may make you fail a couple of times so that they can make you pay them more money, but it's about making them more money. It's not about you really being professionally successful in your career. The other way that you can prove that is ask them for how they're going to help you get a job after you pass their certification. Do they have any kind of referral program like colleges do? Colleges will often help make sure that whenever you graduate with one of their degrees, that they can introduce you to the right employers. Certification programs aren't doing that. They're taking your money and they are ghosting you. That like that person that you met in a bar in the middle of the night in Dubuque years ago. Maybe that was just me. Next up, Alex's DBA says, hi Brent, SQL Server 2019 has automatic index tuning. No, it does not. It doesn't. It says, which my bosses love. Okay, now we've established that both you and your bosses are incompetent. Do you think it's worth turning on in a heavily used financial system? No. What you think you're hearing is Azure SQL DB's automatic tuning. I am a fan of that. I am a fan of it because I think it's a good fit for people who don't have enough time to tune all kinds of databases. It's better than not doing any index tuning at all. And I look forward to the day when they drop it down into the on-premises box product, but it's not here yet, unfortunately. So, did I actually say that both you and your boss were incompetent? Yeah, I think I did. Oh, it's crazy. Next up, we have Rob. Oh, I'm a terrible person. Rob says, my development staff at my new job loves to use query optimizer hints a lot. How do I best approach them that this is, in general, should always be used as a last resort, and come see me if there are better ways to optimize their queries? Oh, that's so funny. So the way that I would start is, whenever you start a new job, it's really tempting to go in and lay down the law. Yeah, but it has nothing to do with indexing though. I mean, that's where I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about there. It's really tempting when you start a new job to go in and lay down the law. It's tempting to assume that everyone who works there is incompetent. But I would say you want to spend a mix of like 1 to 2 months of listening before you start saying that's wrong. I agree with you. I absolutely, totally agree with you. I think that they should be used as a last resort. It might be, I don't think it's likely, but it might be that these people are highly trained and that they're trying other ways to improve queries before they use the hints. I don't think it's true, but just listen and make sure and ask them, hey, before you tried this hint, what did you try? Did you try reading the execution plan? Did you try looking at the indexes? Did you try looking at the statistics? Did you try looking at whether the plan is timing out early? Things like that. But just ask what they did try and then go, oh, have you thought about trying these other things? And maybe it's going to be, well, we don't know how, and we would like someone to help. Then he says, then use a stick. If that doesn't get a bigger stick, then get a stick that makes a whole lot of noise when you pull the thing that's attached to it. Kaboom! But no, I try to find out why they're not doing other things first. Next up, Scott says, do you have any suggestions for documentation that SQL DBAs should create and maintain for each SQL server? I actually asked this or answered this on a previous office hours, and Scott, I actually answered it from you. Like I remember seeing the question from you. So just go back and check prior office hours. I don't remember which one it was, obviously, and that's like me telling you to go jump off a cliff, but I spent like 5-10 minutes. It was in one of the ones where I was in Iceland roaming about, like maybe I was talking to puffins or at a dock or something like that. Next up, Dimitri says, what is your favorite data auditing method in SQL Server? So what I do when someone says that they want to do auditing, I ask them, does it need to be legally defensible? Do you need to worry about standing in a court of law to prove that the auditing is correct? I'll give you an example. There are rumor sites, gossip sites in the United States, all over the world, like TMZ or the Daily Mail, publications that want to publish things that other people shouldn't really be seeing or talking about. So, for example, TMZ might want to buy George Clooney's medical records. If TMZ publishes George Clooney's medical records tomorrow, there's going to be a court case and a big old lawsuit. And whoever's the database administrator is going to have to prove who retrieved George Clooney's medical records, whether they needed to see it or not, like which doctors they are, which nurses, so that we can track down if we have a doctor or a nurse who's proactively going out and looking at different people's health records in order to sell them to TMZ, even though that doctor doesn't have anything to do with that patient's care. There will be a lawsuit. People will be standing in court. And in that case, you don't want to use anything built into SQL Server or anything that you wrote yourself, because it'll be very easy for an expert witness to pick you apart. For example, if you use the data auditing feature built into SQL Server, if I'm the opposing expert witness, and I've been an expert witness in cases, if I'm the expert witness, I'm going to say, Yes, database administrator, can you prove to me that this auditing feature was not turned off during any time span and was not accessible to anyone? Can you give me a list of everyone who could have turned it off and what logins they have? Are any of those logins shared? Can you show me all throughout all of the logging periods a consistent time and date span with no missing gaps in between? And can I go in right now with the help of your security team, disable it for 5 minutes and re-enable it, and let's see what the logs would have looked like. Let's see how you would have known that I disabled it. In situations like that, you don't want to use stuff that's built in. You want an appliance that sits in between SQL Server and the network, something that just grabs all network traffic that the database team doesn't even have access to, that only your security team has access to. Those third-party appliances are really expensive. They're like $100,000 US and up. They're going to need redundancy. You're going to need it in both your production and your disaster recovery sites. But if you're going to stand in front of a court of law and say that the audit is correct, that's what you need to do. If you don't need to stand in a court of law, my favorite is actually triggers. I really like triggers because they're easy to put in and tear down, and I can put in whatever logic I want inside of those triggers so that I can only capture the columns and rows that I'm really interested in when I need it, and then I can rip it all back out as quickly as possible. Thank you, Jersey. Next up, Kumaran asks, is there any performance benefits or disadvantages by having the primary key on different columns than the clustered index? Oh, wow. Usually the only time that I ever see that make sense is when we have an existing set of primary keys that are used for things like foreign key relationships and replication. And we have a different way that we want to store the data. Like people don't ever query it by that key, and they do heavily query it by another set of columns, or it's heavily loaded by another set of columns. But whenever I give an answer like that, I want to give you a percentage of the time where that's true. Like across the span of a year when I'm working with clients, how often does that really happen? And I'm going to say that it's maybe once a year that I have to do what you're describing there. Disturb Chucky. And let's see here. Next up, Kirill asks, how much knowledge does a DBA need to gain about .NET, C# or Java to be able to tune applications based on their languages? None. Zip, zilch, zero. You know how the job title is, and I'll say it slowly, database administrator? It's not C# administrator, it's not Java administrator, it's not Perl administrator, it's not PHP administrator. Your job as a database administrator is hard enough just understanding the database, let alone any other languages. If you try to be great at SQL Server and great at a language, odds are you're going to end up sucking at both. I know because I gave up languages along the way as well. I do know people who are pretty good at one and then halfway sort of okay at the other. I don't know a lot of people who are great at both. It's extremely rare. Next up, Santa asks, Santa asks, what would be the best technique to delete 90% of the data in tables with the specific hardware or whatever? If you're going to delete 90% of the data, what you want to do, because you're only keeping 10%, build a new table for the 10%. Build a new table for the 10%. Pipe the 10% data over into it, and then build whatever indexes you want on the table after that 10% is moved across, rather than trying to do deletes. It's just way faster, much simpler, easier. And if you want to search for more on that, Google for Michael Swart, S-W-A-R-T, Michael Swart blue-green deployments. And he talks about how moving data from one table to another while a system still remains online. But that's the way that I would approach it. Next up, we have Ricardo. Ricardo says, is there a tool or method to convert a plan into T-SQL? No. Occasionally SQL Server finds great shortcuts, and I wondered if I could engineer those back into the original stored procedure. No, and you wouldn't want to. If SQL Server found great shortcuts, that's because SQL Server looked at your T-SQL and decided the most efficient way to write it. Odds are you would, yeah, exactly. Odds are you would, if you try to write T-SQL that matched the execution plan, your T-SQL would be completely unmaintainable. Human beings wouldn't be able to read it. It'd be just like gobbledygook. I say that because I've seen people optimize T-SQL to within an inch of their lives, and then the business requirements changed, and they really had to wad up that T-SQL, throw it away, and start over. You want your T-SQL to be easier for people to maintain. Next up, we have Douglas O'Neill. Douglas asks, why didn't that go in? Let's go see if that worked. Hold on a second here. Maybe it's going to work. Maybe it won't. Click on that. Well, for some reason, it's not showing on the screen. Let me just go hit. It would be funny if I lost internet connection. No, that went. Let's try to see if I can hit the link. We'll go hit PullGab again, just hit it again from scratch. Oh, it looks like, PullGab was just running a little slow there on my end. So now let's click on Douglas's question. No, for some reason, there it goes. Douglas O'Neill asks, I know linked server updates are frowned upon, so what's the best practice for doing real-time updates on data in one server to updates being done on another server? Move that data onto the same server. If you find yourself saying that two SQL servers have to be at the exact same point in time all the time, and you have different databases, put them on the same SQL server. And sometimes people freak out and they're like, no, I can't do that because it's too much load. And then we go and look at the server and it's smaller than my laptop. Keep things in perspective in terms of my laptop. My laptop is 12 CPU cores, 64 gigs of RAM, and 2 terabytes worth of flash storage. If the servers involved are smaller than that laptop, think more about centralizing the data rather than trying to do the Super Bowl shuffle and move this data all over from one place to another. Next up, Zybasek asks, are you going to speak more about Power BI in the future, or is it not in your area of expertise? That is totally not in my area of expertise. When I go to learn something, I'm trying to decide, do I want to teach this ever later, or do I just want to use it as a consumer? And that helps me remind me when I need to stop learning, because I love learning. Oh, it's so much fun. I could learn everything, but unfortunately, there's not enough hours in the day to learn everything that you want to learn. For example, I'm not going to go there. Coming back over to the question. So I love Power BI. It's really cool for me as a small business person, but I don't know enough to teach it, and I have no plans to ever go learn to teach it because I'm just not going to be that good at it. Plus, Power BI has a really fast change rate still. Microsoft is changing so much about it. And because of that, you're just better off going directly to people who work for Microsoft or who can specialize in Power BI. In terms of YouTube, search for Guy in a Cube. Guy in a Cube videos have a very high production value. You learn a lot very quickly with them. Just great guys. Adam and Patrick are fantastic, and they really do justice to Power BI. Next up, not the DBA you're looking for. That's funny. When I retire, I'm going to have to retrain or retire along with him. I know, right? Like, in a perfect world, I would love to retire by the time that I'm 50. I'm 47 now. So we'll see how that goes. That gives you a rough timeline of what you need to do in terms of work. So the question was, do you think SQL Server will be fully replaced by Azure SQL someday? I don't. Only because I still know a lot of companies that don't trust Microsoft with the data that they put inside of SQL Server. I should say a lot is a little bit weird. I don't want to say it's the majority, but there's a chunk of companies who, for example, that end up hiring me for SQL Server work. And often when we're doing consulting, I'll say, hey, why isn't this in the cloud? Like maybe you're doing a really crappy job of managing your SQL servers. Why don't you move them to the cloud? And they'll give me a little litany of answers around, we don't trust Microsoft with it. We need the SQL Server physically close to our environment. Somebody says a lot of the data isn't allowed to be in the cloud either. I don't buy that. A lot of people who think that then go and read the more in-depth regulations and they're like, oh, actually it is allowed to be. There's some crazy amounts of data in the cloud in terms of things that you would find very legally questionable. But there is a lot of that resistance for a really long time, and I don't know that it's ever going to go away. Similarly, mainframes. People built a lot of applications on mainframes, and even though there are better ways to build or run and host applications these days, just those old legacy applications that still chug along in a mainframe, they're going to be there in different forms of the mainframe for a really long time. I think the SQL Server is going to be that way for quite a ways to come. I do think, though, that the default place for new data should be the cloud. Like when you go and create a new database, your first question should be, why wouldn't we use the cloud for this? Because it just makes so much stupid stuff go away. I don't ever want to deal with backups and restores again as long as I live. You know, like screw that stuff. Let Microsoft manage it. Are they going to have problems? Sure, but you know, so are we. Carl Sixsmith says the GDPR in Europe is really strong, especially with the Patriot Act in the USA causing concern. Sure, absolutely. However, that doesn't mean that you can't use a cloud provider in specific data centers inside your own companies. Because at the end of the day, or inside your own countries, I mean, at the end of the day, if the United States government wants your data, they're going to get it. Yeah. So next up, Jorge Rivera, good to see you. Jeremy asks, is the SQL job market good right now? I think so. Yeah, I think so. I'll stop there. And if you go to my blog, if you go to brentozar.com, every month I put out a blog post saying, here are people, or if you have a job in my network and you want to post the job in the comments, you're welcome to. There are always like a dozen to 24 jobs that sound really good that are available that they just haven't been able to fill. So do you think SQL jobs will continue to be in demand in the next... Be careful, he's probably already there. Do you think SQL jobs will continue to be in demand in the next 5 years? Production DBA jobs will continue to drop. Production DBA means people who do backups, restores, install SQL Server, configure SQL Server, troubleshoot SQL Server when it goes down. Production DBA jobs will continue to decrease because businesses are looking for ways that they can automate that stuff, host more servers with less, manage more servers with less database administrators, and also they're moving towards the cloud. However, development DBA roles, which are basically people who help you get more performance out of SQL Server or Azure SQL DB, as it may be, those are still on fire. Like you can't hire enough people for them because they help you save money by cutting your licensing bills and so forth. Drop Table says, how about people who cause SQL Server performance bottlenecks? Man, the job market for that is just on fire. Just incredible. People are doing it voluntarily. Ecall asks, hi Brent, accelerated database recovery, is it safe to use now? In your amazing course about TempDB, why thank you. I remember you mentioned the ashamed bug that Microsoft didn't fix as well. I don't know what you mean by that in terms of accelerated database recovery. I'm not sure about that bug. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't remember offhand what it is. Is it safe to use? So one of the big worries that I have is accelerated database recovery stores the version store inside the user databases. So if you've got 50 or 100 databases on a server, now all of them are going to grow instead of them being able to use TempDB as a shared storage area. Plus, a lot of people run their TempDB on local solid state storage, and it's very fast, whereas their user databases are out on a shared drive area like shared storage that is not as fast. In that case, your version store will be slower. The only time that that version store is going to help you is when you need to do rollbacks. So because of those things, for me, the real audience for accelerated database recovery is people who need to do rollbacks frequently and large rollbacks at that. I don't know a lot of people who are in that position. I don't get a lot of people calling me going, Brent, here's the deal. We need your help right away. We run rollbacks all the time. We can't write code worth a donkey's bottom. We're constantly hitting errors and having to roll back. Do you have a way of making our rollbacks go faster? Because my answer would be, fix your code? Could we just write the code a little differently so that we're not doing rollbacks all the time? And we talk about that in mastering query tuning. We talk about how to avoid deadlocks, for example. We talk about it in mastering server tuning as well. So usually for me, it's usually about fixing the problem via index tuning and query tuning. I don't have an aversion to accelerated database recovery. I'm just not really sure who it's written for right now. And of course, anytime that you enable a feature, there's a risk. VTOL Freak says, raise his hand, had an application whose concurrency control was causing primary key violations. ADR saved my butt there. And my guess, and this is just a guess, is that you couldn't fix the concurrency control problems inside the application. And in that, I'm fine with using it. Totally makes sense. Exactly. And it's not like accelerated data. You wouldn't implement accelerated database recovery in order to fix that. Reborn Phoenix asks, how crazy am I for dropping foreign keys to get a small butt puts? Get a small butt? If you're dropping foreign keys and your butt gets smaller, you need to send me more details about that. I don't want pictures, but I think I could use a little weight loss. And if foreign keys have something to do with that, color me interested. Puts the query over performance gain in a mature database. So I'm mature too. As I get more mature, I'm more and more worried less about the size of my butt, but it's more about the size of my gut, but is what it is. I'm worried about data consistency. Should I trust the developers to do things right? So when you hit concurrency issues, joking aside, when you get to say 1,000 inserts per second, 1,000 updates, deletes per second, it is common to run into foreign key constraints being a performance issue, even when they're indexed correctly, and you're not crazy at all. What I tell people is have foreign keys in the beginning when you're developing the application in the beginning. But over time, as you hit, say, 1,000 inserts per second, you may need to start peeling it off depending on what your concurrency problems look like. And you're not crazy at all. Let's see here. We're coming up on the top of the hour. We'll do one more query. Georgia asks, let's see here. Georgia asks, is there a way to automate scripting out a database schema without using any third-party tools? Yes. I believe DBA tools can do that. If you go to dbatools.io, I think it's dbatools.io. Let's go take a quick look here. dbatools.io. Yeah, if you go to dbatools.io, that is a PowerShell framework that has all kinds of cool commandlets for things that database administrators often need to do. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like 95% sure that there's a commandlet to script out the database, and it has all kinds of options with whether you want to include the indexes, whether you want to include the stored procedures, and so forth. Totally free, doesn't cost you anything, it's open source, so that would be the place that I would go, is dbatools.io. And if you need help using it, by all means, go into their community section. They have a very vibrant, active Slack channel. All right, and that is today's office hours. Thanks for hanging out with me, y'all. I am now going to, if we're all. Well, and my friend asks, I love that too. Doesn't SSMS do that too? That's a good point, but it doesn't automate. They had specifically said automate, so I wanted to get closer over to that. That sounds right. Export DBA script. So that brings us to the end of today's office hours. I wish I could tell you I'm going to do something glamorous, but I am going to go take a nap. I had lunch. I've done this. It's kind of warm inside here. I'm going to open the windows. I know it's hard to believe that Iceland actually gets warm, right? But it actually does get warm if you close the windows. I'm going to go open the windows, get the nice ocean breeze into here, and I am going to go take a nap. So I will see y'all later. Adios, everybody.